Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the English Daily Book Summary YouTube channel. In order to not stop learning, listen to an English book summary every day for free.
Martin Rady, The Habsburgs. The Rise and Fall of a World Power. For nearly 650 years, the House of Habsburg stood at the center of European power. Their empire stretched across continents, earning a reputation as the realm on which the sun never set. Unlike other dynasties that relied on military conquest, the Habsburgs mastered a different strategy. They expanded their influence through marriage. While rival monarchs invested in armies and wars, the Habsburgs built alliances with dowries and wedding feasts. But this reliance on strategic intermarriage came with unforeseen consequences. In the early 20th century, a researcher traced the ancestry of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and made a startling discovery. Though he traced over 4,000 ancestors back to the 16th century, only 1,500 unique individuals appeared in the family tree. Husbands were simultaneously cousins, wives were nieces several times over, and the resulting web of relationships was so tangled that Franz Ferdinand was related to a single ancestor through more than 100 separate bloodlines. This blink tells the strange, fascinating story of the Habsburgs, a family that married its way to global dominance, then inbred itself into extinction. From obscurity to empire. The Habsburg story begins not with grandeur, but with mystery. While later mythmakers would attempt to trace the family back to legendary five-horned bulls and Merovingian kings, author Martin Rady confirms that their verifiable origins were far more humble. The earliest documented Habsburg ancestor was a minor nobleman named Canzelin, who lived around the late 10th century in what is now the border region between France, Germany, and northern Switzerland. It was Canzelin's son, Radbot, who would establish the family's namesake. According to a popular legend, Radbot was out hunting when he lost his prized hawk. While searching for it, he discovered a rocky outcrop above the River Aire that seemed perfect for a fortress. He built his castle there and named it Habsburg, Hawk's Castle, which eventually shortened to Habsburg. In reality, of course, things were far less romantic. The name Habsburg likely referred to a nearby river ford, Hafen, rather than any hawk. For centuries, the family barely used the name, listing it as just one among their growing collection of properties. The Habsburg name was only popularly revived in the 1800s when Europeans became fascinated with ancestral origins. The original Castle Habsburg was imposing but modest, a stone keep with thick walls, a 4-story residence, and a square tower. Later expansions added a courtyard and additional living quarters. Far from just a military fortress, it was designed as a family home, though today only portions remain for tourists to visit. But the family's true rise to power began with Rudolf I, who became the first Habsburg to be elected Holy Roman Emperor in 1273. This happened almost by accident. The prince-electors, deadlocked between more powerful candidates, chose Rudolf as a compromise. They believed this minor Swiss count would be easy to control. They were quite wrong. Rudolf used his new position to acquire the Duchy of Austria for his family in 1282, establishing a power base that would sustain Habsburg ambitions for centuries. This strategic acquisition changed everything, moving the family's center from their modest Swiss beginnings to a wealthy territory at the crossroads of European trade. The Habsburg marriage strategy began its sharp rise to prominence in the 15th century under Maximilian I. In 1477, Maximilian married Mary of Burgundy, heiress to the vastly wealthy Burgundian territories that included much of present-day Belgium, Luxembourg, and parts of France. This marriage wasn't just a personal union, but a strategic masterstroke that nearly doubled Habsburg holdings overnight. When Mary died in a hunting accident just 5 years later, Maximilian fought tenaciously to preserve these territories for their son Philip. This Burgundian inheritance provided the Habsburgs with immense resources and positioned them at the commercial heart of Europe. which is why Maximilian would later cement this strategy with his famous motto, "Let others wage war, you, happy Austria, marry," establishing the blueprint for Habsburg expansion that would soon also bring them control of Spain and a global empire. From Golden Age to House Divided. Maximilian's son, Philip the Handsome, cemented the family business in strategic marriage alliances. Philip married Joanna of Castile, daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, the Spanish monarchs who had sponsored Columbus's voyages to the Americas. When a series of unexpected deaths made Joanna heir to the Spanish kingdoms, the Habsburg family suddenly found themselves positioned to inherit not just Spain, but its rapidly expanding global empire. Philip and Joanna's son, Charles V, came to embody Habsburg power at its zenith. Born in 1500, Charles inherited an astonishing collection of territories. From his father, the rich Burgundian lands; from his Spanish mother, the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon, along with their Italian possessions, North African outposts, and the new American colonies. In 1519, he was elected Holy Roman Emperor, adding Central European territories to his domain. This unprecedented accumulation of power led to the famous observation that in Charles's empire, the sun never sets. For the first time in history, a single ruler controlled territories spanning the globe, from Spain to the Netherlands, Austria to Naples, and across the Atlantic to Mexico and Peru with their rich silver mines. But governing such a vast and diverse empire presented enormous challenges. Charles spent his entire reign traveling between his territories, constantly shifting focus from one crisis to another. He faced threats from the expanding Ottoman Empire in the east, religious rebellion in Germany as the Protestant Reformation spread, and relentless rivalry from France. Charles ruled over dozens of different cultures, languages, and legal systems. What worked in Castile might provoke rebellion in the Netherlands. Decisions that pleased Italian bankers could infuriate German princes. Exhausted by these challenges, Charles made a momentous decision in 1556. He abdicated all his titles and divided his empire. His son, Philip II, received Spain, the Netherlands, Italian territories, and the American colonies. Meanwhile, Charles's brother Ferdinand received the Austrian lands and the imperial title. This division created the two branches of the Habsburg family that would shape European politics for generations to come: the Spanish Habsburgs with their global empire, and the Austrian Habsburgs centered in Vienna. Though they remained closely allied, the two branches would develop distinct approaches to governance, religion, and culture, a recognition that even the mighty Habsburgs couldn't rule the entire world from a single throne. Adaptations and change. The split between the Spanish and Austrian branches didn't end the Habsburg story, but it began a new chapter of challenges and reinventions. Both branches embraced the Counter-Reformation in the 16th century with remarkable zeal. As Protestant ideas spread across Europe, the Habsburgs positioned themselves as the defenders of Catholicism. They funded Jesuit colleges, built magnificent Baroque churches, and sponsored religious art that would inspire the faithful. This intense religious commitment, however, helped ignite one of Europe's most destructive conflicts: the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648. Sparked by tensions between Catholic and Protestant states, what began as a rebellion in Habsburg-ruled Bohemia soon escalated into a devastating continent-wide conflict that left much of Central Europe in ruins. The war ended with the Treaty of Westphalia, which significantly curtailed Habsburg power by recognizing the sovereignty of German princes and limiting imperial control within the Holy Roman Empire. In typical Habsburg fashion, the dynasty responded not with retreat, but with cultural resurgence. They turned to art, architecture, and music as tools of political influence. Under Emperor Leopold I, Vienna blossomed into a Baroque capital of dazzling palaces, churches, and theatres, a city where artistic achievement projected power more effectively than military might. Composers like Mozart and Haydn thrived in this environment, producing enduring works that would long outlast the era's political turbulence. The early 18th century brought yet another crisis for the Habsburgs, the extinction of their Spanish line. When Charles II of Spain died childless in 1700, it triggered the War of the Spanish Succession, a brutal conflict over who would control Spain's vast empire. Though the Austrian Habsburgs fought fiercely to claim their cousin's inheritance, they ultimately lost Spain to the French Bourbon dynasty. This defeat, however, came with consolation prizes, including the Spanish Netherlands, or modern-day Belgium, and valuable Italian territories. Just a few decades later, the dynasty faced an even greater challenge. In 1740, Emperor Charles VI died without a male heir. His daughter, Maria Theresa, inherited the Habsburg lands but immediately faced threats from rival powers eager to divide her realm. Through resilience and strategic political maneuvering, she not only defended her inheritance but reformed and revitalized it. Her sweeping administrative changes, modernizing taxation, education, and the military, ushered in a new era of Enlightenment governance. But the final blow to the traditional Habsburg world came with Napoleon Bonaparte. After defeating Austrian forces in multiple campaigns, Napoleon forced Emperor Francis II to dissolve the 1,000-year-old Holy Roman Empire in 1806. Francis responded pragmatically, having already declared himself Emperor of Austria 2 years earlier. The Habsburg monarchy had lost its medieval imperial title, but emerged as a more centralized, modern Austrian empire, ready for the challenges of the 19th century. The Habsburg inheritance. While the Habsburg political strategy of marriage alliances had built them a global empire, it came with an increasingly visible cost. As Habsburg princes and princesses married their cousins, nieces, uncles, and other relatives, their family tree began to fold in on itself in concerning ways. The Spanish branch of the family demonstrated these effects most dramatically. Philip II's heir, Philip III, was the product of the marriage between close relatives. His son, Philip IV, would marry his own niece, producing Charles II, the last Spanish Habsburg. Charles was perhaps the most obvious casualty of generations of inbreeding. He was born physically deformed, with the pronounced Habsburg jaw that made eating difficult. He suffered from numerous health problems throughout his short life. In fact, the infamous Habsburg jaw, technically known as mandibular prognathism, became more pronounced with each generation of intermarriage. This distinctive facial feature, an elongated, jutting lower jaw, became so associated with the dynasty that it was considered a mark of legitimacy. Portraits attempted to minimize these features, but diplomatic reports described Habsburg rulers in less flattering terms. Beyond physical characteristics, repeated intermarriage led to reduced fertility and higher infant mortality. Charles II of Spain, severely disabled both physically and intellectually, never produced an heir despite 2 marriages. It was his death in 1700 that ended the Spanish Habsburg line and triggered the War of Spanish Succession. The Austrian Habsburgs, while continuing the practice of cousin marriages, were somewhat less extreme in their inbreeding. Yet they too faced diminishing genetic diversity. By the 19th century, Habsburg rulers like Ferdinand I suffered from epilepsy and other conditions that made effective governance difficult. Despite these biological challenges, the Habsburg Empire entered the 19th century as one of Europe's great powers. After the Napoleonic Wars, the Habsburgs regained much of their influence under the leadership of Prince Metternich. The 1848 revolutions across Europe threatened but didn't destroy Habsburg rule. Emperor Franz Joseph, coming to power at just 18, would go on to rule for an astonishing 68 years. Under Franz Joseph, the Habsburg monarchy reorganized once again, forming the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1867. This dual monarchy attempted to manage the rising tide of nationalism among the empire's many ethnic groups. Meanwhile, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, nephew of Franz Joseph and heir to the throne, found himself at the center of a dynastic struggle that would soon engulf all of Europe. The sun sets on the empire. By the dawn of the 20th century, the Habsburg Empire had survived more than 6 centuries of turbulent European history. Its final chapter would open with Emperor Franz Joseph still on the throne, a living symbol of Habsburg continuity in rapidly changing times. Now in his 80s, the emperor had witnessed the transformation of his realm from a traditional monarchy to a dual Austro-Hungarian state, trying to manage the complex aspirations of its many nationalities. Franz Ferdinand, the emperor's nephew and heir to the throne, represented both the enduring Habsburg bloodline and its mounting challenges. Like many of his ancestors, Franz Ferdinand's family tree folded back on itself multiple times. A diligent researcher who mapped his ancestry discovered he was related to many ancestors through multiple lines of descent, solid evidence of the dynasty's persistent intermarriage practices. Unlike many of his predecessors, however, Franz Ferdinand defied Habsburg tradition when it came to his own marriage. He fell deeply in love with Sophie Chotek, a lady-in-waiting who, though noble, was not considered dynastic material. After years of struggle, Franz Joseph finally permitted the marriage, but only as a morganatic union, meaning Sophie would never become empress and their children could never inherit the throne. This personal drama played out against a backdrop of rising nationalism throughout the empire. The Habsburg lands encompassed Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Ukrainians, Romanians, Slovenes, Croats, Serbs, Italians, and more, many of whom increasingly sought independence or unification with their ethnic kin beyond imperial borders. On June 28, 1914, Franz Ferdinand and Sophie travelled to Sarajevo, capital of the recently annexed province of Bosnia. There, a young Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip assassinated them both. The shots fired that day would echo across Europe, triggering a chain reaction of alliances, ultimatums, and mobilizations that plunged the continent into World War I. Franz Joseph, then 84 years old, led his empire into this catastrophic conflict. The war would be his last great crisis. He died in 1916, not living to see the final dissolution of the empire he had ruled for nearly 7 decades. When the war ended in 1918, the Habsburg Empire collapsed completely. The last emperor, Charles I, was forced to renounce his role in governance, though he never formally abdicated. The Treaty of Saint-Germain dismantled the empire into separate nation-states: Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and parts of Poland, Romania, Italy, and Yugoslavia. The Habsburg dynasty, which had once ruled much of the world through strategic marriages, ultimately could not adapt to the age of nationalism. The same genetic intertwining that had consolidated their power eventually contributed to their decline. Their legacy lives on not in ruling monarchs, but in the magnificent palaces of Vienna, the artistic treasures of Madrid, and the very map of modern Europe, shaped by both the rise and fall of this remarkable family. In this blink to The Habsburgs by Martin Rady, you've traced the extraordinary rise of a dynasty that grew from obscure Swiss nobility into a global powerhouse. Through a strategic emphasis on marriage over military conquest, the Habsburgs built an empire so vast that under Charles V, it was said the sun never set on their rule. To preserve their power, the family increasingly married within its own ranks, an insular strategy that led to distinctive physical traits like the infamous Habsburg jaw, along with declining fertility and health. These biological costs mirrored their growing political vulnerabilities. Yet for centuries, the Habsburgs proved remarkably adaptable, transforming from medieval counts into defenders of Catholicism during the Counter-Reformation, and later into modern imperial rulers. Still, they could not withstand the forces of 19th-century nationalism, which ultimately fractured their multi-ethnic empire. Their 600-year reign came to an end with World War I, but the Habsburg legacy lives on. in Europe's art, architecture, music, and even in the modern borders shaped by their rise and fall. Okay, that's it for this Blink. We hope you enjoyed it. If you can, please take the time to leave us a rating. We always appreciate your feedback. See you in the next Blink.